You're listening to Infertility Bites. Infertility bites, but it bites a bit less when you're not alone. My name is Casey, and I'm blessed to be joined by my co-captain in this journey, my wife Sarah.
Hello.
On this series, we're going to talk about our experiences dealing with infertility. It is important to note that we are not doctors or even experts, just people that understand how difficult and lonely it can be. Each person's journey is unique, just like a fingerprint, so it's best to leave the medicine to the professionals. The last episode was all about change, specifically learning to expect it and roll with it. Make sure to check that episode out if you haven't, and let us know how change hit your situation. This episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about the costs again.
Yeah.
So, costs for infertility treatment is a lot, and it can be overwhelming.
And most insurances don't cover for any of it.
A lot of it depends on the state you're in. Some states require coverage for it. A lot of states don't. Nebraska, where we're located, does not. But there are some people who do have coverage for it. However, even when you have coverage, it typically has limitations that aren't going to cover the entirety of your expenses. And so it still can be very expensive. We've talked a little bit about it before, but I kind of wanted to delve into the costs a little bit more here. For those that are just new on this and haven't really started budgeting out, this kind of can help you get a little bit of an overview, an idea of what to expect.
Yeah, because it can be, overwhelming.
It really, really can. So, and every person's situation is going to be unique and different. We had to go through full IVF, but fortunately we were in a situation where Sarah's embryos developed fine, so we didn't need anything like donors in that respect, which can be a lot more expensive. But there's going to be a lot of things, and the biggest thing is it can get overwhelming because they itemize it. It's not just a package. Here, X number of dollars gets you one round of treatment. It's split up amongst every little thing. And so if you need more testing, that's more there. If you need different screening, if you need genetic screening, all of this stuff kind of adds up. That's what the initial consultation is going to be. The doctor is going to kind of get an idea in the first time what plan you're going to go through. But everything, like our last episode talked about, is subject to change. When we had our first initial consultation, they thought IUI might be an option for us.
Yeah.
After doing some more testing on Sarah and then my semen analysis, it turned out that IUI was not going to be the best option for us. And that changed the plan there. I'm going to be going off the price list, the current price list for
2021.
For 2021 for Methodist Women's Health, which is where we went through. This is the most updated one of theirs. So it's actually a little more expensive on here than what we had to deal with. Because again, ours was 3+ years ago. But depending on where you go, the prices will be different. So I'm going to kind of generalize. I'm not going to give the exact numbers as they appear on this, because this is more about giving you an idea about where roughly things are going to line up. But most places are going to charge an initial consultation fee. It's going to be upfront. Going to do the moment you walk in the door for your first ever meeting with them.
Yep. Like, give us money.
And it's fair. At Methodist, it was like around $400. I think that's what it is right now, $400. And that's just up front, and then the doctor sees you, and then they devise a plan. Now, the price list that they're going to give you, wherever you go, is not going to include, at least usually not going to include the drugs on the price list, because you're not going to get your drugs directly from your fertility clinic. you're going to order them from a specialty pharmacy. And if you're lucky, you're going to live in a town that has a specialty pharmacy that you can order from, call up and then go pick it up or whatever. At the time, we didn't live in a town that had one. So we had to order by mail, which adds a little bit of frustration, a little bit of worry, I should say.
More worry just because it's all so time sensitive. Mm-hmm. And then, people do take things off people's porch. And so I think I was always concerned just that some random person would be like, look, there's this package.
Or it doesn't arrive in time and you're out one day and that can throw your whole...
Some of them are temperature-wise, so you're also worried about, all sorts of things.
But so, in terms of medication, depending on what route they're going, whether you're doing IVF or IUI or an FET, frozen embryo transfer, or whatever, right? You're talking anywhere from around $3,000 to $10,000 over the course of one treatment. And it can be more, it can be less, and that's something that they're not going to be able to predict out the door, because it's going to depend a lot on how quickly you go from treatments to ready for implantation, right? If you just need to do IUI is going to be the most affordable option. It's going to be the one that doesn't break the bank per time as much. Yeah. A lot of people could easily swing. It's usually around $800 per time. That doesn't include the drugs again, but $800 per time. And many people could budget $800 into their month pretty easily, to do it. But it adds up.
Still a chunk of change.
It's a chunk of change. And again, add in $1,000 in drugs and then it's a different thing altogether. But if you have to go through IVF, then that's when things start going up. You've got, going back, even with IUI, there's going to be certain things that are going to have to happen. You're going to do some screening labs, right? Those aren't super expensive for a lot of them, screening for different diseases like HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, things like that. Usually around $25 to $50 each, right, per person if you want to screen both. Everything. There's going to be a day 3 lab panel. That's usually going to be around $300. That's something that's going to happen either way. Depending on the protocol you're in, based on the doctor, they may do labs like estradiol, LH, progesterone, things like that. Those are going to be roughly $50 each. But if you're on an IVF treatment, you might have to do 6 of them or 7 of them sometimes. So that's going to add up there. You may have to do things like and I'm totally going to botch this name, but Hysterosalpingogram. It's a big word and it's got way too many vowels in it. But that's ultimately where they're injecting dye in and checking to make sure your fallopian tubes are clear and all of that stuff. That can be $1,000 to $2,000 there. The guy, I'm a big proponent of checking the guy out. I've mentioned before the 30-30-30 rule. 30% of the time it's exclusively on the woman. 30% of the time it's exclusively on the man, and the other 30% of the time it's probably both. So 60% of the time the guy is somehow involved. Semen analysis, $500, right? That's a big deal. That's a big chunk of change. If you need ultrasounds, and you will need ultrasounds, right?
Like we've said, I had to get one almost
Well, and this is just the ultrasounds before
Yeah.
you're pregnant. And then, of course, once you're pregnant, you've got all of the ultrasounds after that. But so ultrasounds, you'll need probably 3 or 4. So that's, going to be $900 to $1,000 there. That's a big thing there. Then you get into, like I said, IUI, $800, depending on all the other treatments you have. IVF, though, you've got all sorts of things that you need to deal with. You potentially, depending on the male situation, have to have testicular biopsies, and that can be $1,500 in just lab fees and $1,500 to $3,000 in urologist fees, right there. You've got the biopsy for pre-implantation screening. That's where they check the genetics of the eggs to make sure that they're healthy, that they're quality, right? Sometimes you're gonna have the choice to maybe not do it. Sometimes you have the choice, you don't. Sometimes you have to do it, sort of a thing. The retrieval itself is gonna be $7,000 to $8,000, right? And that includes the fertilization, the sperm processing, all of that stuff in there. That's the big chunko change one. But on top of it, you've got then the big one, the embryo transfer. That's when they actually take the embryos, the fertilized eggs, and they implant it. That's going to be about $3,000.
Yeah.
So you can see this starts to add up, and it's so hard to wrap your brain around how much it could be up front because it's itemized out. You don't know exactly which ones you're probably going to deal with. You just have to.
And still, every week, at least for us, I was going in, and that was $400. Mm-hmm. And I was taking some drugs, but not. Well, yeah, I was taking stuff, but I mean, that's none of that's including the $400 weekly visits we had just to, and they were like tops like 10, 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. I mean, she would just check to see how things were looking down there, and she'd be like, okay, looking good. Okay.
And, of course, adding into that for us an additional expense.
Oh, yeah.
Because as I said, we're not from Omaha. We weren't living here at the time. Our little town was about 3 hours away from Omaha. So that's approximately 200 miles. So we drive from small town Kearney to Omaha for a 10, 15, 20-minute doctor's appointment, and then drive back to Kearney.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a tank of gas. That's another $20, $30, depending on your car. You're probably going to have to eat food somewhere in that, so there's more there. All of these little things add up on it, right? Then there's cryo preservation, right? So if they're just cryopreserving the eggs unfertilized, that's $1,000. If they're cryopreserving them fertilized, like in our case, we've got, I want to say it's like 5 or 6 eggs.
Yeah, something like that.
That are cryopreserved, waiting for us to get a chance to use them. That's about $1,000 for them. That doesn't include the fact that every year,
we get a bill.
We get a bill from the cryopreservation center saying, "Hey, pay us to keep these frozen eggs."
And we do.
And we do, because there's
always a dream.
The hope that we'll be able to do this again in the future. As expensive as it is, it's worth it. So I wanted to kind of talk about this because all of these things just add up. They just kind of go on top of each other and on top of each other, and they just keep stacking, and it can get really overwhelming to see all of this stuff come together. That's why it's important to to be aware of it and plan accordingly. Understand, depending on your situation, you're looking at anywhere between $3,000 to $30,000 there. And then I told you that we were fortunate enough to have healthy embryos on our own. If you need donor eggs, that's like 40 grand. $40,000. And I get it. It's a supply and demand thing. It's quality, all of that stuff. But, you're already spending $30,000, and now here's another $40,000 on top of it. This can get out of control. And when you're doing it all out of pocket, it is absolutely overwhelming, which is why I'm 100% down with the idea of doing anything you need to do, right? If you need to set up a GoFundMe and get friends and family to donate some money to help you through this, do it. Yeah. If you need to open an Etsy store and start selling handcrafted, hand woven mittens or whatever, do it.
I remember while we were there was a place for you to do gift certificates. And part of me is like, man, I wish if I would have known that, I would have been telling people. Of course, we didn't know we were going to have to go through this, but, if you've got some family members and say, like, hey, for Christmas, what you're doing, I mean, you could just say, hey, you can gift certificate me. I mean, this was at Methodist. I'm assuming every place has something like this. But, when it comes to holidays or birthdays and, where normally people will get you stuff, you just say, hey, $25, $50, whatever is all going to be, it's all going to be important, and it'll all add up, and you will use it. So I recommend that too. Look to see if you have something there.
And like I said, for us, we were fortunate enough to have equity in a house that we could leverage towards paying for this. And unfortunately, we don't have that house to leverage. Although we had it leveraged about as much as we could at the time. But, that's not something that we can do for this time. But I know some places have arrangements with different banks, lending facilities and stuff to help you finance through them. But like I say, if you need to set up a GoFundMe, set up a GoFundMe. If you need to sell, hand whittled whistles on Etsy or whatever, do it. You make buttons or heck, set up an OnlyFans. I'm not going to judge. Whatever you need to do to get the funds to pursue this, I'm 100% down with. I'm not going to judge anything. Because just looking at this, you need, $400 for the initial consultation. And then you're doing $8,000 for the egg retrieval. And then $1,000 for the embryo transfer. So now you're at almost $10,000. And then, you got to do some biopsies. So that's another $2,000 there. And then, $4,000 worth of drugs, and that's low end, but that's where it's going to be there. And then another $1,000 in labs. I mean, you can see these just sort of adding up. And you need the different sonograms and stuff like that. And so, instantly you're up to that $20,000, $25,000 range. And
yeah. And maybe it would be helpful. I mean, if you had, whenever you decide to go through this, to get this sheet and to show people, because my family didn't quite grasp how expensive it was. They were just kind of like, what? And I even wish I would have just brought the paper with me and been like, this is what I'm talking about. It's not cheap. Mm-hmm. I think people, they always think of just the turkey baster situation, and they just think, well, that can't be too expensive. They just don't understand. So sometimes showing people physically, like, this is the actual price list, the bare minimal of everything you're going to be spending. And so I recommend people show your family so they can kind of see, because then that's maybe where they'll be more willing. And I understand not everyone has a family that can help out. But I mean, if you do, or your friends, and maybe your friends might know someone that, you never know. But I wish I could have gone back in time and I would have been like, here's the paper. This is, I mean, people just didn't grasp. You took out a $25,000 loan? Like, what? I don't get it. And I'm thinking, well, I know where it all went, but I'm just saying that could be helpful.
I mean, the simple fact, even just typing out or taking a picture of the price structure from whatever clinic you're going through and putting it on your GoFundMe page. Because that's something I didn't think about at the time. We did video updates on our GoFundMe page about thank you for donating to the GoFundMe, and you're helping us out. We've made it this far on our goal, but we're going to start our treatments, all this stuff. But we got about $1,000 out of the GoFundMe, and it definitely helped. I've talked before about how the GoFundMe helped us out in other ways that weren't financial. But it did help us financially. But I almost feel like it might have helped us more financially if people coming to the GoFundMe actually saw how much money was needed to do it. Because like here, we talk about having some eggs frozen. I didn't even talk about one thing on here, the frozen embryo transfer. That's almost $5,000 there. That doesn't count the drugs that Sarah would have to be on to prepare her body for the frozen embryos. It doesn't count any of the labs that they'd have to do. It doesn't count the consultation fees there. So here we're in a situation where you've already got some eggs. They're fertilized. They're of some decent quality.
Yeah.
And so we can have some expectations for them to be successful, but we're looking at probably about $10,000 to $12,000 just to do frozen embryo transfer, and that's the cheaper route. And so that's why I say, I mean, I'm not ever going to judge anyone for doing anything they have to do to try to go through this. And I'm not going to judge anyone who looks at this price list and says, you know what, I'm going to think adoption because it's stupid expensive one way or another. And I just want people to finally reach their goal of having a little bundle of joy that they can bounce on their knee. And genetics don't matter at that point. It's all about being family.
Yeah.
So that's why I just wanted to kind of talk about this, because I think there's some people, some of our listeners are really early in the journey. And I say really early. I'm a big believer that your journey is a lot longer than you think it is, because your journey in infertility started that first time you said, hey, I think we're ready to start trying for a baby. And it didn't succeed. And then it continued the second time, the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time, so on and so forth. And then after for a year, then you start talking to a doctor, and the doctor's like, well, maybe we should try this and try that. And for us, we mentioned it was 6 years before we got to a point where we were actually talking to doctors who really knew anything about anything, right? So a lot of people say, oh, I'm just starting the journey. You've started the journey. You're halfway through the journey, most likely. You're just now to the point where you think you're in the journey. But those people relatively early on who haven't had a chance to talk to an RE yet, who haven't really started to do this, it is important to know where the numbers come from and how big they can get and how they can kind of tumbleweed forward. And we were some of the lucky ones. And it's always weird to say that because we had to go through this infertility battle that a lot of people don't. But we were lucky because our first try with IVF was successful. And every day on one of the Facebook groups or the Twitter groups that I follow, I see people who are not successful and they're heartbroken, and it's get back up and do it again. And it can be absolutely heartbreaking. And I feel for them, and all I can do is send as much good juju their way, which is why we created this podcast, is to help send the juju around. But so that's kind of all we have today to kind of talk about the money side of things.
A little more in depth. If we missed anything, if there's something that you feel like we should have talked about, hit us up, infertilitybytespodcast@gmail.com, at InfertilityPod on Twitter. Infertility Bites is on Facebook. We're all over the place. Let us know. You can send us direct messages on anything. Let us know what you think we should have mentioned a little bit more on this, or should have gone more in depth on this. On top of that, I mentioned on the last episodes that we really need more stories, more submissions from listeners. So if you are in this journey, whether you're just getting started, whether you've been in it for a long time, whether you've been successful or had failures, we want to tell your story. So head on to the link. There's going to be a link in the show notes to our Flow page. It's going to give you a link straight to the way to submit. Let us know your story. This show really works best when we have some of your stories to tell. And we're low on stories right now. So tell your friends, tell other people that you know that are going through this about this podcast, about where they can submit their stories, because I want to tell more stories. That's what this podcast is really about. So submit your stories to us so that we can get it out there to the world. If you've got a GoFundMe, we're happy to send people that way. Oh, yeah.
Get you a little bit more on
Anything
your way.
that can help.
If you have an Etsy or whatever, we're happy to help, right? But we've got Facebook, Twitter, email, all of that stuff. The links are going to be in the show notes so that you can get in touch with us however you need to. If you are enjoying this show, reviewing it on whatever platform you listen to also helps us out a lot. It helps other people find this show. It helps them understand what we do. And if you're comfortable sharing this on your social media, I know that this is a sensitive subject, and some people aren't ready for their friends and family to know all about it. But if you are comfortable, if you're to that point, or maybe this is where you let people know that you're dealing with this, share this on your social media. Just say, "This is a podcast, speaks to me," and let them know. That also helps us out a lot. But for now, we're going to wrap things up for this week. As always, may your dreams of tiny feet be answered soon. Thanks for listening. We're going to let our little scientific miracle send us off with loves and kisses.
Bye.
I love you.
Hello.
Hello.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Mwah.